Are you lost too?
Maybe we can be lost together then.
Sometimes, one story is enough to change a heart forever. Welcome to Heart Change Stories.
Are you lost too? Said the autistic little boy to the single dad CEO millionaire at the bus stop. The rain had been falling all afternoon. Soft, steady, like it was too tired to storm. It tapped gently on the metal roof of the empty bus stop on Maple and Fifth. The world seemed wrapped in gray mist and tired sighs. Daniel sat alone on the bench, motionless, like a statue too heavy with sorrow to move. His black suit clung to his frame, shoulders soaked but uncaring. A leather bag rested beside him, not the kind of bag a CEO usually carried. This one was small, worn, with frayed seams. Inside it, hidden between tissue paper and old letters, was a tiny stuffed giraffe, his daughter's favorite. 6 months. That was how long it had been since he lost her. He ran a hand through his dark, rain-dampened hair, staring out at the empty street. His eyes weren't looking for anything. They had long since stopped hoping to see someone coming. They were simply open, because closing them hurt more. From the corner of his eye, Daniel noticed movement. Not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that tugged gently, like a whisper. A small boy stood by the street lamp. No umbrella, no coat, just a navy hoodie several sizes too big, sleeves hanging over tiny fists. The child stood very still, almost unnaturally so, as if afraid to breathe. His eyes stayed on the ground, tracing patterns in the puddles with his toes. Daniel blinked. The boy couldn't have been more than 7. He glanced around. No one else. No parent calling. No car nearby. The boy was alone. Daniel shifted, unsure. He had no business getting involved. He barely knew how to take care of himself these days, let alone. And then, without a sound, the boy took a step forward. Then another. Rain clung to his eyelashes, and his lips trembled as he lifted his face toward Daniel. Their eyes met. Something stopped in Daniel's chest. The boy's eyes were wide, glassy, and distant. But there was something else, something deeply familiar. A quiet ache, a hollowness too big for someone so small to carry. The boy tilted his head. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Are you lost too?" Daniel froze. He stared at the boy, as if the question had pierced something hidden. The words, so simple, so innocent, hit harder than anything anyone had said to him in months. His throat tightened. For a moment, he could not speak. The rain fell between them, filling the silence with soft drum beats. The boy waited. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he nodded, just once. His lips curved slightly, somewhere between a smile and surrender. His eyes glistened, not from the rain. "Yes," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Yes, I am." The boy didn't move, but something in his small face shifted, something like understanding, like recognition. Daniel reached into the bag beside him and slowly, gently, pulled out the stuffed giraffe. He held it out toward the boy without a word. The boy stepped closer. Carefully, as if unsure whether he was allowed, he reached out and took the toy. His fingers brushed Daniel's, light and trembling. Then he sat down on the bench, right beside him. 2 strangers, 2 broken hearts, and in the quiet rain, for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt completely alone. Daniel still couldn't believe the boy had spoken to him. Of all people, of all moments, most children glanced away from him, drawn to other things. Some parents even gave him sideways looks. Something about the way he carried his silence like armor, the cold edge of his tailored suits, the absence of a wedding ring. But this little boy, soaked in rain and shadows, had looked right into him and asked the one question Daniel had never been able to answer. He turned slightly, careful not to startle him. "Where's your mom, little man?" Daniel asked softly, kneeling a little to match the boy's height. His voice carried a gentleness he hadn't used in months. The boy didn't speak at first. He stared at the raindrops collecting at his feet, his lips moving slightly as if counting them. Daniel waited. After a few quiet moments, the boy whispered, "She said to wait here, but it's been long." The words were simple, but they carried a weight Daniel knew too well. Waiting, hoping, holding on to promises that time slowly erodes. He sat down next to the boy again, slowly, carefully, close enough to offer presence, but not too close to frighten him away. They sat in silence, the kind that was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Raindrops tapped a slow rhythm above them, the city passing them by like a distant hum. Every now and then, the boy would murmur something, half sentences, scattered thoughts. Her shoes were wet this morning. I don't like loud buses. She always smells like toast. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't fill the silence. He just listened. It reminded him of how his daughter used to speak when she was sleepy, half in dreams, half in memories. Her name had been Lily. She would have been 7 this month. He looked down at the bag beside him. He hesitated, then reached in carefully and pulled out a small plastic dinosaur, a faded green triceratops with one horn chipped. He held it in his palm like an offering. My daughter used to love this, he said, his voice soft but steady. You want it? The boy looked at the toy. His eyes flickered with recognition, then hesitation. Slowly, with both hands, he reached out and took it. He didn't say thank you, didn't smile, but he clutched it close, like something precious. Daniel watched him hold the dinosaur to his chest, the way Lily used to cradle hers at bedtime. The boy scooted closer, just an inch, then another, until their shoulders almost touched. And then, to Daniel's surprise, the boy leaned sideways, ever so gently, and rested his head on Daniel's arm. It was light, barely there, but it made Daniel freeze. No one had touched him like that since Lily. Not with trust, not with warmth. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe too loud. He just let the boy stay there. The bus came and went. Another passed without stopping. Still, the rain fell. Still, they sat. Daniel looked down at the boy, his soaked hoodie, his small hands gripping the toy, the way his lashes fluttered when he blinked. He wasn't Daniel's child, but somehow, in that moment, he felt responsible. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, out of something deeper. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he had been put here for a reason. That on this quiet corner of a rainy street, 2 souls had collided, not by accident, but by quiet design. Daniel lowered his head, let his cheek rest against the boy's damp hair, and for the first time in 6 months, he closed his eyes. Just for a moment, not to escape, but to feel something other than pain. Beside him, Evan, though he never gave his name, let out a slow, steady breath. They didn't need to speak. They were both lost. But at least, for now, they weren't lost alone. They waited. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Daniel had stopped checking the time. The rain had softened to a mist, but the cold crept in through the metal bench and the damp air. He shifted slightly, enough to glance down at Evan without disturbing him. The boy still held the triceratops tightly to his chest, but his posture had changed. His shoulders, once relaxed against Daniel's arm, were now beginning to tense. His fingers tapped erratically against the plastic toy. His breathing grew shallow, fast. Daniel recognized it, not just from Lily, but from himself. The body's quiet descent into panic. Hey, he said gently, his voice a soft echo under the roof of the bus stop. You okay, buddy? Evan didn't answer. His eyes darted toward the street, then to the clock above the pharmacy across the road, then back to his feet. His lips moved, silently counting. 1, 2, 3. Daniel leaned forward, placing both feet firmly on the ground, anchoring himself before speaking again. She's not here yet, huh? Evan shook his head. Once. Sharp. Daniel hesitated, then asked the question carefully. Do you want me to help you find her? The boy didn't respond at first. He blinked rapidly, fists tightening around the toy. Then he whispered, so low Daniel barely heard it over the drizzle. Only if you promise not to leave. Daniel froze. The words landed with the weight of memory. Lily had once said the exact same thing, clutching his hand the night before her first hospital stay. Only if you promise not to leave, Daddy. He hadn't. Not once. He turned fully toward Evan and gently placed a hand on the boy's small shoulder. I promise, buddy, Daniel said, voice steady but thick. I won't leave you. Evan's shoulders stopped trembling, just slightly. He nodded, and for the first time, he looked up, really looked, into Daniel's face. And that was enough. Daniel stood, stretched a little, then offered his hand. Let's go find your mom. Evan didn't hesitate. He slid off the bench, wiped his damp palms on his hoodie, and reached up. His small fingers slipped into Daniel's with surprising trust. Warmth bloomed unexpectedly in Daniel's chest. They stepped out into the city, into the muted buzz of cars and footsteps and conversations behind windows. Daniel kept his pace slow, careful. Evan walked beside him in silence, only occasionally muttering street names or pointing without speaking. They checked the coffee shop across from the pharmacy, empty. Then the public library, where a kind staff member said she hadn't seen a woman matching the description. Evan grew quieter, his steps smaller. Daniel kept his grip firm but gentle, speaking now and then, not to fill silence, but to offer calm. Do you and your mom come to the park nearby? Yes, Evan mumbled. And the church on Sundays. And the food place where they give us bread. Daniel's throat tightened at that. Okay, he said softly. We'll check all of them. They moved from one spot to another. Each stop another reminder of how big a city could feel when you were little and scared. But Daniel didn't falter. Every time Evan's steps slowed, he matched them. Every time Evan looked up, Daniel met his eyes and smiled, even if it hurt. Together, they searched, not just for a woman, but for something more. Connection, safety, a path home. Neither of them knew it yet, but they had already begun to find it. The city buzzed quietly around them as Daniel and Evan approached the last stop on their search, a church basement where a local charity served meals every afternoon. The line outside was long. People in worn coats and tired eyes stood patiently beneath the awning. The scent of warm soup drifted into the rainy air. Evan squeezed Daniel's hand a little tighter. He hadn't spoken much for the last few minutes, but now his steps quickened. Inside the hall, folding tables lined the walls. Volunteers moved efficiently behind serving counters. Steam rose from trays of bread and pasta. And then, Evan stopped. His breath hitched. There she was. A woman stood near the end of the line, passing out bowls of soup. She wore a soft pink dress, slightly faded, and her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands gloved, her face flushed from effort, but unmistakably her. "Mommy!" Evan shouted, voice ringing out like a small bell. The woman turned. Her face went pale. "Evan?" she gasped, stepping out from behind the table. Evan let go of Daniel's hand and ran. She dropped the ladle mid-serve and rushed toward him. They collided in the center of the room, arms flung tight around each other. Evan buried his face in her neck. She held him like she never wanted to let go. "Oh my God, baby, I was so scared," she whispered over and over, her voice cracking. Daniel stood nearby, unsure whether to approach. His heart twisted at the reunion, at the pure, raw love in that embrace. But then she looked up and saw him. The warmth in her expression vanished in an instant. She pulled Evan protectively behind her, her eyes narrowing. She scanned Daniel quickly, his tailored coat, his expensive shoes, the watch on his wrist. Her body tensed. "Who are you?" she snapped. "Why is my son with you?" Daniel raised his hand slowly. "Ma'am, why is he holding your hand?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp now, filled with panic. "Did you follow him? Did you touch him?" Evan clutched her dress tightly. Daniel took a cautious step back, his palms still open. "No, I didn't. I found him, at the bus stop, alone, in the rain. He stopped, words tumbling over each other. "I stayed with him. We were looking for you." But Sarah had already turned, pulling Evan toward the exit. "I'm calling the police," she muttered under her breath. "Get away from us." Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. He watched them walk away. The boy he'd protected now shielded from him. His heart pounded, not with anger, but with something heavier, defeat. And then, "Don't be mad, Mommy," Evan shouted, twisting in her grasp. "He's sad like me." The words echoed across the hall. Sarah froze mid-step. The room hushed. She turned, slowly, her arms still protectively around her son, her eyes locked with Daniel's. For the first time, she really looked at him. She saw the soaked collar, the weary eyes, the deep, quiet sorrow he carried in his shoulders, a sorrow that mirrored the loneliness she'd seen in her own son for months. She looked down at Evan, still clutching the plastic dinosaur in one hand. "He's sad like me," Evan repeated, softer now. But he stayed. Something cracked in her. Her grip loosened. Her breathing changed. She turned fully to face Daniel, uncertain now. "What happened?" she asked, voice quieter, less combative. Daniel didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. And Sarah, for the first time in years, let herself see past her fear. She saw a man who was just as lost as she had been, and a little boy who, for once, hadn't been alone. The apartment was tucked above a laundromat, the kind of place most people walked past without noticing. The stairs creaked as they climbed, and the hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. Sarah unlocked the door and stepped aside to let them in. "Come in," she said softly, almost awkwardly. "You can sit for a bit. Just thank you for staying with him." Daniel gave a small nod and followed her in. The apartment was small, one bedroom, an old pull-out couch in the living room, peeling wallpaper at the edges, but it was clean, and there was warmth in every corner. A blanket folded neatly over the armrest. A few children's books stacked near a modest shelf, crayon drawings taped carefully to the fridge. Evan walked in without hesitation and went straight to the floor near the window, where he pulled out paper and markers from a shoebox. Sarah watched him with a quiet fondness before turning to Daniel. "I'm sorry," she said, "for earlier. I didn't know what to think. He's never done that before. Talked to someone, followed anyone." Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, his coat still damp. "He said you told him to wait." "I did," Sarah nodded. "I volunteer at the shelter on Thursdays. He usually stays with the lady next door, but she wasn't home today. I told him to wait for me inside the shop while I checked in. I was only gone 10 minutes. Her voice faltered. "I should have never." "It's okay," Daniel interrupted gently. He wasn't scared. Not until he realized time had passed. Sarah sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "He's on the spectrum," she explained. "Mild autism. High functioning. But routines matter. Familiarity matters. He doesn't like strangers. He doesn't trust easily." She paused, looking toward Evan. "He didn't even speak to his own teacher until the 3rd month of school." Daniel looked at her, surprised, then slowly turned his gaze toward the little boy, now coloring quietly by the window. "He spoke to me right away," Daniel said, almost to himself. Sarah nodded, her eyes softening. "I don't know what made him feel safe with you, but thank you." Daniel swallowed hard. He let his eyes travel around the room, taking in the worn floor tiles, the photos on the wall, one of Evan as a baby in Sarah's arms, both smiling under a cheap Christmas tree. And then he whispered, "Your son reminds me of my daughter. She passed away 6 months ago." Sarah looked up, her breath caught. Daniel didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The silence between them filled with shared understanding, of pain, of love, of the long nights that followed both. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. Daniel nodded. "She had leukemia. We tried everything, but in the end," he trailed off. Across the room, Evan stood and walked over with a piece of paper in his hand. He held it out to Daniel. Daniel took it carefully. It was a child's drawing, simple, uneven lines, and bold colors. 3 figures stood beneath a large gray cloud. One small, in a blue hoodie, one tall, in a black coat, and one with yellow hair, holding both their hands. Daniel stared at the drawing. His throat tightened. "That's us," Evan said, pointing. "Me, you, and her." Sarah leaned forward. "Her. My sister," Evan said softly. "She can be your daughter now. She lives in me." Daniel blinked, the tears rising before he could stop them. He tried to speak, but his voice caught. Instead, he placed the drawing on his lap and covered his face with one trembling hand. And for the first time since his daughter's funeral, Daniel cried, not from pain alone, but from something else. Something softer. Something that felt a little bit like hope. The next morning, the city woke to the kind of sunlight that felt like forgiveness, warm but not harsh, slipping through the clouds with gentleness. The rain had gone, leaving behind puddles that sparkled like tiny mirrors on the sidewalk. Daniel stood by the curb outside Sarah's apartment, unsure of why he was there so early. He had barely slept, his mind replaying Evan's words, the drawing, and the quiet comfort of that cramped but kind little home. For the first time in 6 months, he didn't feel like a ghost haunting his own life. The door opened. Evan ran out first, his small arms flailing excitedly, the dinosaur toy clenched in one hand. "Park day," he declared, voice louder than Daniel had ever heard. Sarah followed, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Her pink dress fluttered in the breeze, and her hair, though hastily pinned back, caught the morning light like threads of gold. They walked together. No plans, no schedules, just 3 people trying to reclaim something lost. The park was still damp from yesterday's rain, the grass a bit muddy underfoot. Evan didn't care. He ran toward the swings, his laughter high and pure as he called for Daniel to push him. Daniel hesitated. Then he smiled. He walked over and gave the swing a gentle shove, and again, until Evan was soaring, squealing with joy. Sarah watched from a bench nearby, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the sight of her son, carefree, safe. After swings came slides, then the merry-go-round, then a game of tag that left Daniel slightly breathless, and Evan triumphant. Later, they strolled to a nearby ice cream truck. Evan chose strawberry, smearing half of it across his cheek. Daniel picked mint chocolate chip, Lily's favorite, and almost didn't flinch when the cold hit his teeth. Sarah chose vanilla. They sat on the curb together, sunlight warming their backs, the sounds of children echoing across the park. Daniel glanced sideways at her. "You always do this on Saturdays?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "When we can. When I'm not working. You're a good mom." She looked down, half laughing. "I'm just trying. Some days I get it wrong. Most days, I guess." He shook his head. "You didn't get it wrong yesterday." She smiled softly. "Neither did you." There was a long pause, one of those rare, perfect silences that didn't need to be filled. Evan finished his cone, wiped his sticky hands on his hoodie, then curled up beside Sarah, resting his head on her lap. Daniel leaned back on his palms, looking up at the sky. He hadn't done that in a long time, just looked. Sarah watched him. She had seen his sadness the day before, the hollow ache that lived behind his eyes. But now, in this fleeting moment, something had shifted. His shoulders weren't as heavy. His face, though still drawn, had softened. And then, as Evan drifted into a sugar-fueled nap, Sarah reached over and gently took Daniel's hand. He looked down, startled. Her touch was light. No pressure, just warmth, she said, almost in a whisper. "Thank you for letting Evan see how a good man protects." Daniel stared at her hand in his. His throat tightened. He squeezed gently. Then, with a voice steadier than he felt, he replied, "Thank you for reminding me how to live again." Their eyes met, and in that glance, something unspoken passed between them, something fragile but real. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was a beginning. And for Daniel, that was everything. The sun had begun to dip, casting golden light across the narrow apartment walls. Shadows stretched long and soft, brushing over the modest furniture, the worn rug, the little drawings still taped proudly on the fridge. Daniel stood near the window, watching the world below as the city moved on with its usual noise, honking cars, distant sirens, muffled footsteps. But inside the apartment, there was a quietness he had come to appreciate, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah was in the kitchen, rinsing a plate, her movements rhythmic, almost thoughtful. Evan sat on the floor, humming softly to himself, piecing together a plastic dinosaur with unmatched parts. Daniel turned and cleared his throat gently. "Can I talk to you for a second?" he asked. Sarah looked up, drying her hands. Sure. He nodded toward the couch. She followed. He hesitated, then sat beside her, clasping his hands together. I've been thinking, he began, choosing his words with care, about how this place, this situation, it's not what you or Evan deserve. Sarah's brows furrowed. What do you mean? Daniel looked her in the eyes. I want to help you, he said simply. There's a neighborhood not far from here. It's quieter, safer, better schools. I have connections. I could find you a place, maybe help with tuition for Evan's therapy, his education. Before he could finish, Sarah's body tensed. She pulled her hands away and stood up, creating space between them. No, she said quickly, almost too quickly. No, I can't let you do that. Daniel stood too, surprised. Sarah, I appreciate everything you've done. I do, she said, her voice tight. But this? Moving us? Paying for schools? That's too much. It's not. It feels like pity, she cut in. Like charity. Like you're fixing something because you feel sorry for us. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He stepped toward her, slower this time. This isn't pity, he said quietly. It's what family does. Sarah looked away, blinking rapidly. We're not family, she whispered. Daniel didn't flinch. Not yet. She laughed under her breath, more out of disbelief than humor. You're a millionaire CEO. You live in a world where people like me clean the floors. We don't fit, Daniel. I've seen it before. Rich men swoop in, feel like saviors, and when the glow fades, so do they. He shook his head, gently but firmly. That's not me. She turned to him, tears beginning to rim her eyes. You don't know what it's like to constantly be the one who needs help. To wake up every day hoping your son doesn't get bullied. To wonder if next month's rent will come through. Daniel looked down. No, he admitted. I don't. But I know what it's like to lose everything that ever mattered. They stood in silence, the room heavy with unspoken fears. Then a soft voice broke through. Mommy? They turned. Evan stood in the hallway, rubbing his eyes, clutching the same triceratops. He walked up slowly, looked from Sarah to Daniel. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around both of their legs. Then, tilting his head up, he said, Then be my family, please? The room stopped breathing. Sarah's lips trembled. Daniel's eyes burned. Evan held on tighter, his voice muffled now against Sarah's dress. I don't care if we're rich or not. I feel safe when we're all together. The silence stretched again. Then, finally, Sarah dropped to her knees and pulled Evan into her arms. Her shoulders shook with sobs she had held back for too long. Daniel knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around them both. No more distance, no more fear. And in that quiet, golden-lit room, 3 people, once strangers, held on to each other like they had finally come home. The city hadn't changed much in the past few months, but Daniel had. So had Sarah. So had Evan. The same old bus stop still stood on the corner of Maple and 5th, its roof patched with rust and memories. The sidewalk was cracked in the same places. The street light flickered the way it always had. But everything felt different now. Because this time, they weren't alone. Evan stood between them, wearing a crisp blue button-up shirt, one Sarah had picked out just for today. His hair was combed neatly, and his shoes were a little too clean, the way new shoes always were. He held Daniel's hand in one of his, and Sarah's in the other, swaying gently on his feet, humming under his breath. The bus would arrive any minute. Their bags were already packed. Most of their things were waiting at the new place. A cozy little house with a tiny garden, and a school down the block where Evan would start next week. Sarah had been offered a part-time admin job at one of Daniel's nonprofit branches. She insisted on earning her way. Daniel didn't argue. He just smiled and made sure the path was clear. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. Today wasn't about fixing everything. It was about starting over. Together. Evan looked up at Daniel, his big brown eyes squinting against the morning light. Are you still lost? He asked softly. Daniel glanced down, caught off guard by the question. His lips curled slowly into a smile. He looked at Sarah, then at Evan, and he answered honestly, "Not anymore." The bus rounded the corner. As it pulled up to the curb, hissing gently as it came to a stop, Daniel stepped forward first, holding Evan's hand. Sarah followed, her arm brushing his. The doors opened with a familiar creak. They climbed the steps one by one, still hand in hand. The driver gave them a nod. No questions asked. Just a quiet welcome, as if he already knew. Evan slid into the seat by the window, pulling Daniel beside him. Sarah sat across from them, smiling as she watched the two lean into each other like they'd always belonged that way. Outside, the city carried on. But inside that bus, a different journey was beginning. The kind of journey where healing doesn't come all at once, but slowly, with trust, with laughter, with soft questions and even softer answers. Daniel rested his head against the window for a moment, watching the bus pull away from the stop that had once been a place of grief and had now become the place everything changed. As the wheels rolled forward, as Evan pointed out birds and Sarah chuckled softly, as hands stayed connected and eyes met with silent understanding, the camera pulled back, farther and farther, until the three of them were just figures moving down the road together. Not by blood, not by fate, but by choice, by love, by a question that started it all. Thank you for watching this heartwarming journey of healing and unexpected family. Sometimes, the smallest voices ask the biggest questions and change our lives forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales for more inspiring stories that bridge hearts, break down barriers, and remind us that love can be found in the most unexpected places. Because here, every tale begins with kindness and ends in love.